Hey guys, welcome back to the show. My name is Stefan, and this is Empowering Bright Ideas. Usually, when you hear about companies being acquired, these are not agencies. These are large corporations or startups. And this is what makes this interview especially interesting, because Karl Hughes, who is the founder I'm speaking with in this interview, has not just started his own company called Draft.dev in 2020, but also has acquired a podcast consultant start company in 2023. And so, what this interview is about is milestones every founder needs to think about if they want to get to the point of either selling their business or really just getting it over the hump of them being the bottleneck of growth. And so, I really hope you enjoy this and extract as much interesting context as I have. And with this, let's get into it. Let's get started. So, introduce yourself. What are you doing? Who are you? What's your background? Sort of like an elevator pitch for somebody who's never seen you before.
Sure. My name is Karl Hughes. I started my career as a software engineer, started an agency that does marketing aimed at software engineers about 4 years ago, then bought another agency last year, and I'm now working on building a holding company of niche agencies, digital service businesses that over the next few years. So I've got a plan to buy and build and conglomerate as many of these as I can get my hands on in the next decade.
So, and we're going to be talking today a lot about your recent years of acquiring the latest business and sort of the background before and after, what happened after you did this. So how did you get onto this path? I mean, I know that you've been an engineer, as you've mentioned earlier. And how did you get to starting your own agency first? And then how did you get from there to actually deciding to buy some other company of a similar kind?
Yeah. So I've always been interested in startups and small business. Even in college, I was doing entrepreneurship classes, and I did business pitch competitions. I started a little business that never really went anywhere. So I think from that age on, I knew I wanted to do something in small biz or startups. Then when I left college and got into software engineering really full time, I joined really early stage companies. I was the first employee twice, and then kind of grew with them and hired a team. And eventually, my last role I was a CTO at again, very small company, 20 people or less. But it's a great way to learn what it's like to run a small business, to be there right alongside the founders as they go through fundraising and figuring out their first product market fit and talking to customers and all that. So great experience. What happened was it sort of pushed me out of the nest. I kind of thought I was going to be on this track of being a CTO at small startups, like early stage companies. That would kind of be my path. And then during COVID, the last startup I was working for sort of is an unlucky timing where basically lockdown hit and they were supposed to be starting to raise funds for the summer right then. And it's with venture funded startups, if you miss your cycles on fundraising, you just run out of cash and
You're
have
screwed,
to do something. Yeah, you have to do something very desperate. So they kind of ended up shedding a lot of people, took myself and the other engineers that were left down to half time just to kind of save as much money as they could and kind of keep the ship running, which was absolutely the right decision. They ended up selling and the company's doing actually better since the sale. So, all good. But anyway, so I had to do something with the other half of my time, and I was, had been toying with ideas of starting business, toying with ideas of freelancing. I started off just with Draft.dev. The idea was I'll just freelance write as a software engineer and technology leader who likes to write. I'll just do this for a bit, get my name out there, and then maybe get a job in a few months when things from COVID just kind of normalize. And it just quickly sort of pulled me in. It's within 2 or 3 months, I had more clients than I could take myself. So I started to outsource some of the writing and sort of it's just this momentum of the market demanding what I was offering so strongly that I couldn't ignore it. And if you've been through early stage startups, they usually fight for years to find that level of product market fit where they're just getting sucked into demand, And so to find it that early and accidentally, I was I got to ride this wave. I've seen startups fail at this and can't find this for years and spend millions of dollars trying to find product market fit. I have it. Let's just go. And so scaled really quickly. And
I want
anyway,
I want to interrupt you for a second. This is very interesting. I just want to emphasize that a lot of folks, when they hear, oh, I've been in a startup, then I decided to start my own agency, they think, you just go ahead and start saying, I can write whatever for you, or in your particular case, right? It's going to work. It won't. You have to find your niche. So Can you describe a bit more, like what was that product market fit for your case and how did you stumble upon it?
Yeah, so the unique combinations of skills that I have are I was a software engineer, pretty technical, not the best software engineer, but good enough, right? And then I'm a good writer. I like writing. I wouldn't say I'm like, like published author level, but like there aren't many software engineers that write at all. So it's already a good combination of skills. And then the final one is like I was pretty savvy business wise because I'd been the first employee a couple times. I kind of understood how to like think about a business as its own entity and not as just like a thing I do, like trade my time for money and that's my whole life.
That's right.
So I think it was that combination of skills. And then sort of simultaneously, I had a really good like sort of network for this. I had spoken at conferences for years on and off just as a software engineer who likes to speak and write. So I was out there meeting people in the developer relations world. So what I found was there's this huge demand in developer relations for written content and now in video content and all sorts of content because it's really hard to find software engineers that want to create content like this. And so anyway, it was sort of like a culmination of skills plus knowing the right people plus market timing. When COVID hit, all the in-person events shut down. And that was about half of the DevRel and developer marketing budgets were devoted to like going to conferences and sponsoring. That's all gone. So everybody put that budget back into growth through writing and content and things. So it's just like, this is how it goes, right? It's a lot of like lucky timing, but also right skills, right time, right place, all that.
Interesting. So it sounds like the kind of an article you would write is just targeted towards the sort of R&D audience, right? So what kind of an article typically would you kind of write?
Yeah, I'll give you a really tangible example. Say you're a company like Cloudflare that provides web hosting and lots of other products now, but essentially a CDN, web hosting, all that stuff.
Yes,
they
sir.
want to reach software engineers and show them that their product is A, viable for their use cases, B, really high quality, and that they can sort of educate them into seeing the value in it, right? So like all marketing in developer marketing is educational at its root, all good marketing at least.
That's right.
It can't be done in the sense of like, hey, developers, you're really smart people who get paid a lot of money. Please start buying our products just because we put flashy branding and nice names
That's
on it.
a very interesting edge.
Yeah.
I remember, I think I actually mentioned this on one of the previous episodes. Stripe had leveraged this as one of their product market fits, like go-to-market strategies, because instead of going towards usual kind of business people to sell them their product, they went to developer community. Developers are like, oh, I like this. It's super easy to embed. I'm going to start using Stripe versus some other crap. So
Stripe is a great example
edge.
of, not only does Stripe have a great product built for developers, easy to use, they also have fantastic documentation and tons of tutorials and use cases and things like that. Great example of how you can take like a good product and make it even better by just giving really good content around it. And that's what our clients are essentially trying to do. And the struggle they all have was they want engineers to write this stuff so it's actually genuinely useful because it's not like, stuff that a marketer just kind of guesses. It's got to be real. So we built over time, at Draft.dev, we built a network of these engineers who want to write, and then we sort of pair them up with editors and copy editors that clean up their work and make them sound, top tier.
That's really exciting. And so what level did you bring it to before you decided that it's time to take that next leap of faith?
The first full year of Draft.dev, so 2020 was like a half year. I was half time on, so it was just kind of getting started.
Yeah.
The first full year, we did $1 million in revenue, and we had 10 people on the team, and we were just growing like crazy. And now, for an agency, I always caveat this, like scaling an agency basically means scaling people, and it is hard. But at the same time, it's rare in an agency that you can even get a growth like push that fast. So great little like jump. And that kind of gave me a ton of confidence in the idea and in the like, as the team started to pick up more and more of the work, in the ability for them to work. By the next year, 2022, we did $2.5 million in revenue. And, it was essentially, I was out of everything day to day. I had a sales team, I had a operations team that did all the back end and product, or actual production. And then, so I got to a point where I took a whole month off when my second child was born. And I was like, I'm really reflecting during that time, like, what am I doing? Like, this, in a way, it's like, as a small business owner, I went into it like, my goal is to be able to take a month off and let the business run without me. That's like a fantastic goal. And I thought once I got there, I would just like coast, I'd just chill and like spend a lot of time vacationing and traveling, seeing friends. And it's like, I got there and I was like, I want to keep going. Like, what's next? Like, what's the next hard thing to do? Because I think it's rare that people who are driven enough to go start their own business and grow it and hire people and like push the needle ever really want to hit a plateau and say, that's it, I'm good. Like, let's just sit on a beach. Like, it's not in us, And so anyway, I had to come up with something bigger to do.
No, I mean, that sounds, so I'm going to actually ask a couple more questions for those who are curious about the story more. So first of all, so it sounds like most of that growth that you've mentioned, it was basically fueled by your referrals, your referral network. Did you apply any other channels for sales for this business?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've known enough people who run agencies to know that one of the danger zones you can get into as an agency owner is being 100% referral based. Like, sure, it's great. Like, we all want referrals, and that speaks volumes about your work, and we should have a steady base of referrals. That said, it's extremely hard to replicate and scale referrals because they're kind of like, when they come, they come. When they don't, they don't.
You can't control them.
Yeah, you can't control them at all. And they're also usually very dependent on the founder and your personal relationships. And so you really want to try to move away from that. So what we intentionally, from the very beginning, I started investing in content marketing because we're a content company. We're going to have great content marketing in the space. So we started doing blog posts weekly. Yeah, right. You practice what you preach. We started doing blog posts. This year it's been a push towards video, but even early days we experimented with that a bit. And then we also have on and off experimented with cold outbound outreach, especially once we got some good client names to trade on. I think cold outreach is super saturated and hard to do. But when you're in a niche like Draft.dev, it's like we just provide content for dev tools companies. There's only about 2,000 companies in our cold outreach list. It's not like we're spamming people with millions of emails. Like, we send 100 a week. Is very small volume.
I mean, you might as well just send a box with candies to every one of those companies compared to other mail lists. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it's very cool. Low volume, but it works, and we get a couple new deals a month off of it. Is even now. Mm-hmm. So anyway, so we wanted to build out multiple channels, and we've to this day we still do the same thing. We look at it, and we've got 3 big buckets for growth at Draft. It's referrals, which is about a third of the business that comes in. Organic search is another third, and then a mix of social media plus cold outreach gets us that last third.
Okay, interesting. And so, and I'm not going to ask any specific numbers, but what's usually the kind of a markup that you have in this kind of business? So when you mentioned that you have 2.5 mil as your sort of general income, sort of revenue, line. I would say, what's the kind of profit that one could expect for this kind of a business?
It varies widely. Right now, I'm actually talking to a lot of our direct competitors and trying to understand their numbers, and because I'm looking at doing more acquisitions. So I will say for Draft, we've not done great on the bottom line compared to some of them, but it was pretty intentional. And what I mean is I've always taken the mindset of I want to grow this brand and this business really big. And so I'm okay not taking as many short-term profits in the name of reinvesting it into the team and the company as a whole. So we've always kind of overspent on marketing compared to like what some might do in the agency space. But again, like, it all comes back to what are your goals? Like, if you are an agency owner and you want to capture as much profit for yourself personally as you can get 40%, 45% net margins. It's fantastic, right? Like, that you can make a ton of money. On the other hand, and this has always been my approach, it's like, I want to make myself a good living. I set myself a reasonable salary that, contributes to the family. And then everything else I try to drive back into the business. And then that, it also fueled our acquisition we did last year. So like, again, this is like, my approach is always like maximize the long-term value, not the short-term gain.
Okay, interesting. So, so it sounds like the acquisition was there for you to augment your current offering to add more services to your existing clients. Was that kind of the motivation they were pushing you to get this company?
Yes, multiple things. So one was for sure that. So we knew that, AI content's just, around the corner, and it's like becoming more and more of a question for how we're going to be affected by that. And so we wanted to increase our capacity and move into video content. This is a really natural add-on. It's a lot harder to have AI that does your video content. So that was part of it for sure, is hedging our bets there. And then the other big part of it was expanding our market exposure. So something that when you start really niche, the great thing about it is you are a clear winner in a market because you're the only player who's like this specialized, right?
Yeah.
That's awesome. The downside is you're in one very small subset of the broader economy. So when 2023, the tech market was really down, Draft.dev's revenue went in half that year from the year before. So like it was rough. Like we had to lay off a lot of people. We had to really trim down to the minimum, change a lot of our processes to work with a smaller team. What that showed me is like, hey, look, we get to ride the upside of when tech is up, we're up, but then we have to ride the downside. So how do we level that out over the course of years? I mean, I think in terms of a decade down the road, how do I have a portfolio of businesses that can ride these waves at different paces so that some of them are up some years, some are down some years, but either way we can kind of come away like a nice balanced portfolio, right? So that was the part of the idea too, is like, let's start investing in that balanced portfolio and buy a company that has different market exposure. So, the company we bought, which we can dive into that next, but it's definitely working in a different market. Their customers, they've got a great broad customer base in a very different niche. So that kind of levels us out.
Interesting. So, I mean, if I'm not mistaken, you don't have any sort of M&A experience in your past before this. So how did
really,
you...
No.
I mean, usually when a person stumbles upon this kind of an idea, I want to grow, you don't really think, I'm going to go and buy a company. And I mean, I hope that you're making enough money for that to be possible. But in reality, it's a big chunk of cash that you have to put up front to actually get that done. So can you tell me a bit more, how did you navigate that situation where you had this like idea in your mind? Whom did you talk to? How did you actually find the right advisor, I presume? And how did you eventually find that opportunity for yourself?
So like most ideas, mine was essentially lifted from other people, right? Like I'm not the first person to think about buying a company, obviously.
And it's okay.
So here's what my trajectory was. And I'm a very like, a couple things like that probably become clear through this. I'm a very curious person and I get bored really fast. And that's a good and bad thing. Like it means that I learn the base 80% of a lot of skills really quickly. And then I don't care about the last 20%. That's for specialists. So I often try to find ways to like surround myself with people who are good experts to let them take on that latter half. That's always been true of me as a software engineer as well as now. So part of it was just pure like, I got to do something different. I don't want to start a new company because going from 0 to 1 is a lot of work and I just did that. What if we buy something? Like it's totally different. I don't know how to do that. And then part of it was I got exposed around the same time to, I do this guest lecture every quarter at Northwestern University for their MBA program where I go talk about lean product development. And so it's basically like, how can you build an MVP for something without spending much money, time, or engineering resources? Because all these students in the MBA program are like, they're building a business for like a mini case study kind of thing. And so I would introduce low code tools. I would talk about like the ways you can fake things through running ads and having, landing pages that just collect data, talk about running customer interviews, stuff like that. Anyway, so I got to know all these people doing MBAs, and there's this whole track in the MBA program that is devoted to what they call entrepreneurship through acquisition. I had never known, I did not understand, like this was not something on my radar because I didn't go to graduate school. So, but what it is basically people who want to come in and run a small business, but they don't want to start it from scratch. They want to come in and buy, say, a $5 or $10 million business. They maybe pull together some investors because maybe they're connected financially to high level people, or maybe they have wealthy families they can start from, or maybe they just don't mind taking a huge loan. And so there's a book that they all use called Buy Then Build. I read that. I started to like investigate what did this look like for them. And then I kind of sort of took their model and applied it to my situation, which was a little different. I didn't have quite as much cash up front, so I wanted to buy something smaller. I wanted to buy something that they could use my skills more than like a financial buy or whatever. So a little different, but like at the same time, like remixing an idea that was very much established. So that was great because I had all these like people I could go talk to all these people in this search fund community doing this entrepreneurship through acquisition thing and learn the best practices from them about how to get an SBA loan, how to like structure the deal and offer different things to different types of sellers. And so super interesting to like just get and sit down with those kind of people and ask questions. And eventually I sort of picked up enough that I was like, well, I'm ready to try this. Let's see what happens.
Oh, interesting. So first of all, I'll have to link that book in the description. I want to read it myself too. But So did you have some sort of like a chunk of cash on your hand that you wanted to spend, or was it more like, I want to grow and it sounds like it's a good strategy, let me go find the money? And then if that's the case, what happened next? Did you find somebody to help you with this, or
Yeah,
how
so
did you move forward?
Draft.dev was profitable, so it was making money, and so I was sitting on a fair amount of cash, a couple $100,000 at any given time. That was just kind of free cash flow that was ready to be reinvested or whatever. And then I brought in a friend of mine who we've been talking about trying to start a company together, work on something together. He really helped a lot in the early days of Draft, but he technically wasn't a partner there. Anyway, long story short, he partnered up with me. He had some free cash as well, and we were like, we've got enough for the down payment. Now, interesting thing about, M&A, again, if you're coming at this fresh, you don't know all this, so I'm going to assume you know nothing, but if you do know, ignore this.
The only thing I know is that I've watched the movie Pretty Woman with Richard Gere. That's all, from 1990s.
Right. So in America, we have this program called the SBA, Small Business Administration, that essentially is helps back loans to small business owners. And the great thing about that is normally small business owners like myself with a $2 million, $2.5 million business would be very hard for a bank to justify giving me a loan, because my business is very asset light. It's just people and cash flow. It's not really like
it can stop at any point in time. Yeah.
Right. And if Carl dies, gets hit by a truck, it's really hard to justify that business is worth anything. So anyway, the SBA backs these kinds of loans to small businesses like mine. Now, there's a bunch of caveats to it, and there's a bunch of limitations and things like that I won't get into. But the end result of it all is you can put 10% down and borrow up to $5 million to buy another small business if you're willing to take the personal guarantee. So it's a pretty high leverage deal. So normally that kind of high leverage wouldn't be available to a small time entrepreneur like myself. But again, if you're comfortable with the risk and you're comfortable with running a small business like, my partner and I we felt like it was a very good deal all told.
And how are you on the hook with this? I mean, obviously there must be a hook. If you provide a down payment of 10%, are you doing this in putting a house on it, or how do you do this?
Yeah.
What's the hook?
So entrepreneurship is not without risks, right? Like, I feel like,
of course,
this is one of those areas where you have to decide how much you're willing to bet on yourself and where you're at in the stage of life that you want to do this. So with an SBA loan like this, and actually most small business loans, if you're going to take out debt, you're going to put what they call a personal guarantee on it, which basically just means that everything I own and all my retirement accounts, if I have a house, I have a car, it's all subject to repossession by the bank if things go belly up. Now,
I see.
I mean, ultimately, we bought a business small enough that my partner and I both felt confident that even if it fell apart, we had another business that that we can have cash from. We have like partners who make good money too. So we're in a very fortunate position where this still feels relatively low risk. That said, I mean, that it's definitely not without risk. And a lot of people, that personal guarantee bit really, really rubs them the wrong way and makes them not really want to do that.
I mean, if you've never done this before, it's definitely a scary step. That's for sure.
Yeah.
And what's the duration of that loan, and how do you plan to pay back once you make that investment? So
the beauty of it is that the cash flow from the business we bought pays off the loan and more. So the way that and buy then build, again, this is kind of, they walk through the model for this, but let's say that this business, the small business you buy, is spinning off $200,000 a year in what they call free cash flow. That just basically means net profits, right? So $200,000 a year net profits, but the loan is a 10-year $1 million loan. It means you're going to pay less than $100,000 or $200,000 a year. You're probably going to pay $150,000 a year or whatever. I don't want to do all the math, but you get the idea, to pay back that loan over 10 years. So basically, there's money left over after that cash flow, even if you don't grow that business at all. The numbers get even better, though, if you do grow that business, say 10% a year. Now, all of a sudden, you're able to pay off that loan faster, or you can pay it off and have more cash flow to pay yourself, or reinvest in growth. So again, it's a bet that it's basically like taking a bet that says, I'm going to put a bunch of money down and a personal guarantee that says I can keep this business running for 10 years and it'll pay off its own loan, or I can grow it over the next 10 years and have it pay off its loan even faster. And then I get this big asset at the end of it, which is a cash flowing business.
Yeah. And also another thing to mention, and pardon me for my lack of understanding of the language, but if I'm not mistaken, that's exactly the time when the interest rates went up, right? Or was it
Correct.
Before that time?
Yep. Yeah, it was around the same time. Yeah.
So basically, like, what were the interest? What was the interest rate on this kind of a loan? And
Yeah, it's tied to the sort of prime rate. It's like that plus 2%. Very standard thing. So basically, every quarter it'll readjust based on how the Wall Street Journal prime rate changes.
I
So
see.
right now it's like 10% or whatever, and it's going to hopefully go down over the next few years. I mean, obviously there's, it's not fixed interest rate, which is nice because
That's
right now
good, yeah.
the interest rates are high, right? Some banks might give you a fixed interest rate, but I don't know. We just kind of went with yeah. I mean,
So,
honestly,
Mr. Powell, please
Yeah.
put
Yeah.
it down. We
keep
need
coming
it.
down. Yeah, I mean,
Okay.
we've been very fortunate. The business has stayed the same size, and it's still netting the same net profit, and we've been able to make bigger loan payments, faster than we initially anticipated. So like we're in a good spot, but I've met people who this has not gone as well for. So it is a gamble, and it is a bit of a it's a risky business. Yeah.
Okay. So you got the strategy to get the money. You got the down payment, and you got a friend who can help you. What's next?
Yeah, so we started looking for people that wanted to sell their business. The way we went about it was we asked ourselves, what kind of marketing service do we think there will be more of or more need for in 10 years than there are today? And we both really like podcasting. We even more really like video production. Similar, like whether your podcast is just a podcast, just audio, or it's on YouTube, or it's some other, video version. I think there's going to be more businesses doing podcasts, doing media like this in 10 years than there are today. That simple thesis,
Yeah.
So the thought there is, okay, how do we buy into that market? And so we look at it like, all right, there's podcast production agencies. There's probably other types of companies, but we knew there's tons of podcast production agencies. And the great thing about this business is it's a very repeatable, process-driven service. You can find new audio editors and video editors to fill in spots if you lose people. Ideally, if you have a niche like this one does, you can kind of make your sales and marketing a lot better, more efficient. And so we basically went into LinkedIn and put in like a search for podcast production agencies. And then we said they've got to be in the US or else the SBA won't finance it. And we want them between like, say, 5 and 100 employees. We just like pick those numbers and see what comes out. And there's a couple hundred that show up, and because they're on LinkedIn, the founders are on LinkedIn. They're pretty easy to like contact the founders, send a bunch of in-mail to them. Got really high response rates. Even people that were just like, nah, I'm not interested, because I came at it like, hey, look, I'm another small business owner. I own an agency just like you. I want to get into this space. Have you ever thought about selling? Very genuine, and like, just used my like natural, like, I'm in the same spot as you. Do you want to exit maybe? and yeah, it was really good. I had a lot of good conversations and kind of whittled it down from there.
And I mean, so what kind of a life stage does the owner need to be? What you've experienced for that to be like an interesting conversation for them? Are they like young as yourself and myself, or are they sort of coming closer to
Depends.
the retirement
So there's
age?
a couple of personas. Yeah, a couple of personas that I think I'm recognizing now that I'm in the second time doing this process.
Mm-hmm.
One is people who are early to mid-career, and the agency life is not for them for one reason or another.
Burnt out.
So you and I both know agencies are they're very people heavy. They are very up and down depending on the needs of clients in the market around you. They don't, we always we want to have like recurring revenue, but like seriously, agencies don't have recurring revenue. It's all like at best reoccurring, which means they might come back if they're repeat.
That's a nice way to
right?
put it. Yeah.
Yes. So like there's lots of things where maybe the founder wants to go start a SaaS and they want a few $1 million to go like fund the initial version of their SaaS. Great use of like selling your agency, especially when you're young. On the other hand, it is sometimes people who are just kind of burned out, and like maybe they were freelancers that accidentally grew a big business around them, and then they just like don't want to manage people. That's super common, and honestly, like great opportunity, because usually those kind of people have built a great quality business, but as far as like they deliver a great quality service, but they usually have underinvested in marketing and sales and growth because they're so focused on service delivery. So those are a couple. And then you do have occasionally in certain industries, especially you have retirees, although I'll say in the podcast production space, given that it's only a 20-year-old industry at best, like there aren't a lot of retirees in this space yet. But in another 10, 20, 30 years, there will be.
So you found your founder through LinkedIn. Sounds like basically
Yeah.
cold email or cold message to LinkedIn. and apparently they believed you, and they didn't think you were scamming them or anything. Which is, frankly speaking, I got a couple of those emails. Funny enough, I don't know. Yeah. And so what's next? How do you go through the entire process? How does it look like to go? Like, did you guys go deeply into their QuickBooks account and dig into their profitability? And did you get lucky and like that first business you spoke with, they actually were profitable and had the profile for you to be interested in?
Yeah. So there's kind of I liken it to this. There's a dating phase, there's an engagement phase, and there's a marriage phase to this. So the dating phase is you send the cold message. They say, yeah, let's get on a call. You kind of introduce yourself. You try to like, just see if you feel like you could gel with this person and they could gel with you. Because ultimately, one thing that I kept hearing from people who bought businesses was like, and this is totally true. If the seller doesn't trust you, or you as the buyer don't trust the seller, don't do the deal. Because at the end of the day, the lawyers will write all the paperwork in the world, but like you don't want to have to go to court over something you just bought, right? Like you don't want to like, it's like going to the grocery store and immediately I have to go to small claims court to get my bananas from the grocery store.
Yeah, and it's also not the kind of a business that you can just, sell it and forget it. It's going to be more like a phone call at 2 a.m. in the morning. Hey, I'm sorry, what to do in this case? Yeah.
Right. So you want a dating phase. You want to know like you guys are compatible as like they seem like an honest person, the kind of person you can work with and communicate with. And then what we do is ask after that first or second call with them, okay, could we get some high level financials? You don't need to give us access to your QuickBooks, your client list, nothing really proprietary. Give us your top line revenue, your total take home. That's what you pay yourself plus whatever profits left over for the last 3 or 4 years. And from that, we can give you a rough valuation. We'll give you like a soft idea of what we would value the business at. And then from there, you enter the engagement phase, which is what's called a letter of intent. So we would give an estimate. They would say, that sounds pretty good. Like, let's go for it. And so a letter of intent basically says, hi, Karl, I'm going to buy your business. But in doing this for the next 60 days or 30 days or whatever it is, you're not able to, don't go shop it around to other people. You've got to like enter into this exclusively with me for a little bit. Just give me time to look over your books, look over all the financials, get my financing lined up. And then assuming it all goes well, we intend to close the deal. It's non-binding for both sides, so you can technically, like an engagement, break it off, but it feels really bad if you break it off. Like you break some trust, right? Like you want it to go through. And during that phase, we do the actual like digging into their QuickBooks. We do the actual talking to clients, team members, anybody we can to just validate the things they're telling us are true. Look at bank records, credit cards, all that stuff. And then once that all goes through, as we're doing that, we're lining up financing and all the paperwork with the bank, and then it all closes.
And is there some sort of a consulting firm that you guys have used, or is it all manual that you guys do this yourself?
We brought in a couple freelancers to help with specific parts like verifying some accounting stuff. But honestly, this was a small enough acquisition that we just did it mostly ourselves. I think, typically what people have told me is those kind of outside resources would cost you $10,000 to $20,000, and given this purchase price was pretty small, it wasn't really worth it. Plus, we're experienced at running small businesses, so like we felt pretty comfortable looking at the books and being like, does that smell bad or not? And do these numbers make sense or not? And everything was on the up and up, and the seller he was great the whole time. I mean, fantastic guy. Would work with him again 100%. It's like that's the kind of person you want to buy from, right? Because ideally he wants to work with me down the line, and I want to work with him down the line. Like we've actually sent him some potential clients for his new business and stuff. So that was great. Yeah.
So tell me a couple of numbers. So let's say your top of the funnel was around, how many people did you reach out to at the beginning of that story?
Let's say 100 to 200 rough estimates. I mean, probably at least 100.
Okay.
And then out of that, I probably had 24 meetings, 10, 20 meetings a month, 10 meetings a month. Yeah. So probably 20, 30 meetings. And then out of that, we got to that dating phase with really through like 5 of them. We only signed 1 LOI though. We didn't end up getting engaged a bunch of times, which is nice. I mean, you don't want to. Ideally, you want people to pull out as quickly as possible.
That's right.
Just to like make it easy for both parties. And usually when people would take a pause, it was because like the timing wasn't right for them. Like we had a really good one that I thought was interesting, but the founders, like the 2 partners who owned it, they were like, they weren't really ready to sell, and they were like, this is interesting, but like, let's give it another year or 2, and like, let's stay in touch. And so things like that, where we've stayed in touch with them and maybe it'll work out down the line. Yeah.
Okay, so a couple more questions about that. So first of all, when you say that in the letter of intent you're specifying some sort of a total amount for which you want to acquire the company, well, how do you determine that number? Is it sort of your take-home revenue multiplied by X, and what is that
Yep.
X?
Yeah, you nailed it. Agency valuations are actually pretty straightforward. Now you can debate the numbers by a factor of 50, 60, 75%, depending on how special you think your agency is. But the reality is, if your agency does, let's say, $250,000 in net profit that's paid to the owner plus, net profit that's kept in the business, you aren't going to get $5 million for your agency. It's just not even close.
Yeah,
Like
of
you're going to
course.
get somewhere between 2 and 5 times is like very high, 5 times your net earnings. Now it goes up a bit once you start to get bigger agencies. So you're doing more than 5, 10, 15 million in revenue. You start to get bigger buyers who can afford bigger things. Plus, because the business has a certain level of scale, typically people will put a higher multiple on those. But there's basically tiers you could look up out there that have comparable acquisitions like outlined. And so we look at the company, we look at his net profit, we say, yep, this is worth a 3 times SDE. So that's, take home net earnings again. And so that's where we valued it and about what we ended up with at the end.
Okay, and then what is like the framework of thinking that a founder of an agency needs to have to make it even eligible for this kind of a thing? So the first thing I've just heard
Yeah.
is like you got to be out of your business. Like the business should be able to survive without your involvement for the most part.
Yeah, I mean, yes and no, honestly. It depends. So it depends how quickly you want to get out. Maybe that's what I'll say. Because, for example, if you're running a really great agency, but you're still involved in every single client onboarding and sales call, well, the buyer is going to want to keep you for at least a year to onboard and sell to new clients, right? They're not going to immediately, unless they're a strategic acquirer who already has a sales team, they're just going to plug in here, which is rare. They're almost always going to want you to stick around for a year. And sometimes they will tie it to what's called an earnout, which means you have to stay for 1 to 3 or 5 years even, and you don't get your full purchase price until you've worked all those years and hit certain deliverables. So it's basically like having a really, really rigorous boss. It's like for a lot of entrepreneurs, it's kind of a non-starter because it's such a big shift. When you've been used to running your own business, I can imagine you're in the same boat, Stefan, like trying to think about having a boss who keeps you on like quotas and stuff. Like, ugh, I don't want that.
I mean, it's not like I'm not having enough problems by myself, but now I have to report to somebody else. I get it, and it's basically like you're not getting paid at all until you achieve something. Yeah, that sounds scary.
Right. So
okay.
that's the one extreme. Like if you get bought by somebody who say is not experienced in running an agency, they want you to stick around for 3 years. They're going to pay you over time. Yes, it is a way to get out, and sometimes it's necessary, especially when the business heavily relies on the founder. But you really don't want that, ideally. So on the other extreme, when we're looking to buy an agency, we know we're going to come in and improve and take over the sales and marketing side. So if the founder is only involved in sales and marketing, we don't even count that against them. We understand we're going to take that over anyway. So not a big deal. If they are still involved in service delivery, though, that's where it gets to be really hard because if the company relies on them to deliver the service and only them, and they've never successfully trained anyone to do their service, very tough to pull them out of it. And that's where like the business we bought last year, like he did a great job getting himself out of 90% of the service delivery. He was only in a little of it because he liked certain clients, things like that, where it's like easy to pull him out of. He was involved in all the sales, but like, again, I knew I was going to take that over anyway. So not a big deal. We didn't need him around. When we got him out in 6 months, and really he was only working a few hours a week in the last 3 months of that deal anyway.
That's really nice. And so he's already been paid the entire amount, or how does this work in the deal that you've established?
It can work. Yeah, it can work a lot of ways. So this is where you get a lot of creativity as both the buyer and the seller. So as a seller, typically the trade-off is if you want more cash up front and on day zero when we close, you're going to need to have yourself really removed from the business to de-risk it, and you might take a lower total valuation. On the other hand, if you're willing to, say, work in the business for a year and you're willing to take your payments in tranches, say half of it at day zero, maybe a quarter of it at year one, and then the last quarter it paid over the course of 3 or 5 years in like a long-term loan, you can absolutely increase your total purchase price. And actually, in some ways, this is really beneficial to sellers, because if you think about the tax implications of getting, say, $2 million in one single day is a lot different than getting $250,000 a year over the course of several years. It actually puts you in different tax brackets depending on what else you do. Plus, you can make money on the interest if you have an interest rate, which typically these loans do have. So again, there's pros and cons. You should think about it. You should think about your situation. If you're selling because you need $2 million to go start your next startup immediately, and you need all that cash on day zero, that's, that sort of necessitates you taking probably a lower valuation just to get all the cash up front. On the other hand, if you know you're going to be building a company over a few years and you want to take $500K a year for 5-6 years, you might get a much bigger end up total purchase price, but you might have to take it over time.
I see. And one last question before we move forward to more topics like that, to additional topics. What if the acquirer doesn't do a great job? I've heard a lot of stories when those companies that acquire some sort of a startup or whatever, any kind of a business, they screw up because they're greedy.
Brutal,
they're greedy. They want to basically squeeze it for making more money, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really work out. And then even though you're still involved in the business and you're still on the hook for those extra whatever payouts, the business doesn't do well because you're no longer in control. So how does this work? Are you still going to get paid, or is the deal off if the business stops working?
Yeah, it can be really bad. I actually was just talking to a guy last year, right after we bought the company, who had sold his agency, and then a very similar thing happened. The buyer sort of tanked it for one reason or another, and I don't know all the specifics, but it went almost to zero within a year, and wow. He didn't get all the money he was owed, and he tried to go to court, but at the end of the day, you have to pay lawyers to do that, and sometimes if the company has been really ruined, you're not going to get anything anyway. So you got to call it quits at some point. It's that's a real risk. And then this goes back to my point at the very beginning of both, you want to have this dating and engagement period, and you want to take it seriously. Yeah, you want to think is Karl really going to take care of my company? Does he really care about it? Or any buyer? And I think that's, again, that's where being an entrepreneur myself and not a finance guy who just looks at businesses as spreadsheets, but I care. I own a business. I know how it is to look at people. It's one of the things that I think certain buyers will give you more of than others, and you just have to keep that in mind. If you're going to maximize your dollars, but you're selling to a private equity company that really doesn't care that much about the people or the operations or whatever, they're just kind of buying it for some financial reasons, you might get into something you don't want to do.
I see. And so now slightly to the more personal side. So you've told us, you mentioned at the beginning that, after you sort of had that month out to basically deliver the baby, stuff like that, you've started the search, which is awesome. But how did your life, did your responsibilities and the org chart has changed amongst these two organizations that you now control? Is it one merged entity at this point, or are they entirely separate? And how does this work for your time and investment of your effort?
Yeah, they're still primarily separate. My partner and I both track our time, and we send our timesheets to each other just so we kind of see what each other are working on and hold each other accountable. Yeah. And I've always been a big fan of time tracking anyway. It's a good way to understand if you're doing the highest leverage tasks or not.
So I'd be curious to learn more about how do you devote your time between these two endeavors right now? Plus now you're looking for this third endeavor, apparently. Did you hire any assistants to help you with the management? Did you hire a CEO? How does your organization look like? Or are you still sort of doing this all yourself, which sounds unbelievable?
Yeah, I am pretty good about delegating aggressively to people and empowering the team to make their own decisions. One of the things that both my teams will tell you is when they ask me a question hey, Karl, should we do X or Y? I almost never give them a straight answer, and that's intentional because I don't want them to rely on asking Karl, should we do X or Y? I want you to go figure it out, because most of those decisions, 99% of the day-to-day decisions, I don't really know the answer. I have a intuition about how it should go, but I want them to build the intuition, right? I'll review stuff. I'll give them feedback. I want to do that, but I also don't want them to become reliant on me. So that habit, plus just having people, the people who stick around in both orgs are pretty self-driven, independent. They like the autonomy they get at these companies has let us have really good self-sufficient teams. So Draft.dev, I spend 5-6 hours a week on just meeting with the team, keeping an eye on the big picture stuff with them, helping them set goals and direction. Similar with the podcast consultant, although I spend a little more time there because I'm also doing a lot of the sales calls still, and that's a project to get me weaned out of that. But and then the rest of the time is higher level meetings with people that we could be acquisition targets, could be investors down the road. Where that's something I want to look at doing in a couple of years. So yeah.
Let me ask you this: so when you acquired this new business, right? Was the founder still involved with the operations to some extent, or was it like
a tiny bit? Like he would still, he was involved, but he didn't have to be, is the way I would think about it. So he was occasionally like jumping in and helping with an edit here and there, but like he had a team of 24 editors. And so we bet, I guess, that we could find people who could do that work.
So after the acquisition, did you guys hire a CEO or a COO? Like, how did you basically replace the management?
Yeah. So again, like both these teams, they require a pretty light hand with management because they're pretty small. There's like a lot of freelance. Both businesses are structured similarly. There's a core team of 5 or 6 people that are full time, and then a long tail of freelancers that do a lot of the execution work. So the nice thing about a small team of 5 or 6 people is when they're all remote, very like they know their lane, they're very autonomous. Like it doesn't take a lot of management overhead to be their boss, to be the CEO. So I'm still, CEOing both companies, but that's not necessarily the long-term plan. That's just sort of the like stopgap while they're both growing and small. We do ultimately want to get them each the size where they can hire their own either CEO or GM to kind of run the long-term strategic vision as well as the day-to-day operations.
I see. What's the vision for the future? I mean, you have these companies, but I feel like there must be some sort of a silver lining between them that connects these two visions. And you've mentioned you're trying to grow to a portfolio of more of these. What connects them? What are you trying to like? What do you see this whole endeavor looking like in the next 20 years?
Yeah. Well, here's the opportunity that I see, and then how we think we're going to tackle it. Of course, all these plans, who knows? But small businesses that are super niche, that offer a very specific service to a very specific type of client or client in a certain stage or certain industry, have a huge advantage in the digital service space where they can charge a premium for their work because it's so specific and they have this specialization in the industry. And they don't have to spend big marketing dollars to do that. They don't have to be a big brand or spend lots of money on ads and things like that. They can more successfully do cold outreach. They can more successfully do content marketing. Everything gets cheaper and easier when you have a specific niche. The problem, the downside to it, as we've discussed, is market concentration. You're stuck in a very specific niche. And so when the market goes down, you go down. And then the other problem is the max size of a business that does content aimed at software developers is just capped. There's somewhere in between, $5 and $20 million in revenue that that's all you could do with Draft.dev at its current iteration like it is. So how do you solve those two problems? You buy many of them. You have many of these small niche businesses between $1 and say $10 million, and you share as much of the back end services as you can. So this is a common idea, and again, I've just picked this up over time from other people, but common idea in other large businesses where they have a shared services model. So things like accounting, HR, maybe even marketing, maybe even sales, they can be shared between the companies because they're so similar in function, and you can have experts who know how to kind of apply a playbook of best practices and do things efficiently. So that's what we're building towards. So the goal is 10 companies over the next 10 years for 100 million total revenue. The goal, the sort of short term is let's work on an add-on acquisition this year. Let's maybe look at another acquisition next year, start to put CEOs in place, and then we'll look at raising funds in addition to the debt we've already taken out to kind of continue the growth.
That's a rocket ship. What industries are you looking at right now? Are you still looking at like media production and content production?
Yeah, the goal for 2024 is an add-on that complements one of the existing businesses really well. So we want to keep it pretty similar. So we're looking at direct competitors as well as like slight variations of direct competitors for both businesses. And then the year after, I think we'd start to look at maybe a new market. I'm personally, I don't have a thesis yet on the next one, but I'm thinking something maybe in either healthcare, fitness, something like that. That's an area I think that will only continue to grow over the coming decades. I think just people in general are more conscious and aware of health and fitness and what they're eating and all that stuff than they were 2 decades ago. So I think that's an area I'd like to explore, as well as anything that sort of services like big corporate clients too, because those are always like the stickiest, nicest to have for the long term. But we'll see. Automation is really another one that I would love to get into. Like any AI powered automation stuff would be cool. But we'll see. I've got a year to think about it.
Are you planning to sell yourself, or are you planning to go public?
No, my partner and I talk about this a lot, because at some point when we start raising money from investors, we have to come up with a way to cash them out, because investors put money in to theoretically get more back at the end of the day. And so liquidation becomes an important factor. That said, there's a lot of creative ways to do it. I would prefer to have this thing be a buy and build and hold forever. Like I want to work on something that is going to occupy me and give me new roles, new things to work on every few years for the rest of my life. So I don't really have an exit strategy in the traditional sense, but what we can do is potentially have like internal stock sales, or you can have dividend payments to buy back stock, or you can buy back stock, you can have dividend payments. There's lots of ways to get investors their cash without going and selling up the chain. That said, who knows, man? In 10 years, my perspective might be different.
I'll say one thing. One advice that I've heard from folks about who suggest buying a business is that the best advice is never try to sell a business, and then people are going to find you and you're going to be at a position of leverage. So I see why you're saying that. And
That's fair.
So
I just don't know what else I would do. I mean, the simple answer is like, and this is hard. I'm still in the beginning of this journey, but like in 10 years, I might have a different idea. But I think it's fun and exciting and big enough that I don't see a way that this gets boring, because it looks hard. Like I don't know how I'm going to get to these goals, but that's what's fun about it.
Dude, in 10 years, you're going to have another very big startup. In fact, you're going to have 2 startups to deal with until they get 18. And then when they graduate, you're going to think about some other stuff. I'm talking about your kids just in case. Yeah,
yes, those are the big.
Those startups are like the most important startups you can think about in your life. I mean, at least in my case, I think of it that way.
Totally.
When I hopefully get kids in the future. So, one more question. You said a very interesting phrase during our previous meeting. You said that you're talking a lot about how to sell a business or how to buy a business, but then you said it's also not always the best case to do so. So, why would you not sell a business? Perhaps you want to share some of that mentality.
Yeah. Well, if you think about this if you're an agency owner and you're making yourself a good living for you, whatever that is, $100,000, $500,000, I don't know, however much you need, right? And you're getting paid every single year with your agency. And let's say you're not working that hard or that much, and you've got a lot of free time and you're able to pursue little, projects you want and have the lifestyle you want of like, spending time with your family. Like you have to ask yourself, why do I want 3 to 4 years of paycheck and then be done? Because that's basically what happens when you sell an agency. You're going to get 3 to 4 years of what you would have made, and then there's no more money coming in. Now, again, you might be at a point later in life, where you do want $2, $3, $5, $10 million and just sit that in the bank, and that's your retirement savings. Great. Or you might be at a point where you've got this really big burning idea that like you need $1 million to go invest in. Great. But if you're just somebody who's like, that's what I'm supposed to do, then, take a step back and think about that, because like ending that cash flow is a big shift in it's going to shift your brain like in a big way. And a lot of founders that I've met who have sold have had sort of regrets, in the end, that like, they were getting to live the dream and have this business that did well and paid them money, and like they got to have so much freedom, and then that kind of ended and they have to figure out a new thing to do. And often you can't be in the same, you sign a non-compete that keeps you out of that same industry for several years. And there's a lot of things there that can be like a big loss of identity. So it's important to think about what it would look like. And I think as long as you have something else you're going to do next, or you're going to invest this time and money into, I think that might be the best sign to sell. But if you don't, maybe get that first. Like don't go sell and then hope you'll find it, because it's really hard to do once you're out there and just free falling.
That's a very good point. And I mean, it's also like something I keep thinking about, because like I've been having thoughts with my co-founder, not to really sell or anything. We're not at that stage, but really just to structure the company in a way where we're both like out of operations and we can think about other ideas, because both of us have them. But something else I kept thinking and returning to is that people whom you've hired, since you guys are so small, and we're so small, like they believe in you. They work there because they like working with Karl, with Stefan, with Vlad, whatever. Like if and then one day you just send them all an email and say, "Sorry guys, I'm leaving. Now there is this new guy, Jason, who comes in and he's going to be dealing with you, and I really don't care anymore." So it's almost like you're betraying them. Not to say you are, but it might feel that way because you're basically giving up on your family.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I wouldn't personally let that hold me back if I did believe that selling was the right thing to do for myself or the company. But I do think that's a real consideration. And it is like, it shows that, A, you're an empathetic person, which is good that you think about that.
I mean, you have to be.
But B, yeah, I think so too. But B, it also just like, it's maybe the thing I would take away from that is how do I separate myself from the company and start to give the team more ownership of the company, and not necessarily in a like equity ownership, but like how do I make the team feel like this is my thing too? That's something I've always tried to instill at both companies. Like, you guys have a lot of control over what we do and how we do it, and the experience clients get and the experience other teammates get, and probably a lot more direct control than I do once we get beyond a certain size. And so it's really important to let the team know that you value that in their contributions to that, and that they can have that ownership level too.
Yeah, I mean, it gets into philosophy at this point, but yeah, I agree. Karl, thank you so much for this time. Thank you so much for this time. This conversation
Thanks,
and chatting with you before this, it gave me a lot of bad ideas and good ideas too, but to be frank. And, bad in terms of like, too many bad ideas of growing in different directions. But yeah, I really appreciate your time. Thank you for your insight. I wish you the best of luck in finding your, baby number 5 at this point, because you have 2 and then 2 businesses. I hope you guys are going to find another founder without too much fuss, and you're going to be able to go through all the due diligence very easily. And let's stay tuned. I'd love to chat with you again, maybe in a year or 2, because this sounds like an amazing mission. And also what I really like is that, you're not coming from this, Harvard background where M&A has been this go-to thing where people just teach it.
Right.
Your goals are achievable. They're motivating. And there's something that anybody who really has enough wit and energy to do something can achieve and can get to. So, and that's amazing. So thank you again for your time, and, let's stay in touch.
Thanks, Stefan.
Thank you.